unsatisfactory or ineffective. 2, procedural deficiencies on the part of the school system. And 3, job performance. The appeals process is a 2-level process. In level 1, the teacher, within 5 days of the summative rating, will have an opportunity to do a written notice of appeal. At that time, it would go to the principal, who has 5 days to respond to that written notice. If at that point the teacher does not agree with the principal's decision, then the teacher does have 5 days to appeal that decision. If at that point the teacher is still not satisfied with that response from the principal, then it would move to level 2. And then level 2 would come to a GSCS designee who would have 5 days to respond. At that time, the designee must review the complete evaluation record, all documentation in the SLDS platform, the original appeal, and the principal response. GSCS must adopt an appeals policy and submit it to the Georgia Department of Education no later than July 1st, 2021, and any time material changes are made that are made to the policy. The Human Resources next proposed steps is to organize a focus group, which would include principals and assistant principals, who would be responsible for reviewing the policy, identifying some training needs, and then also setting forth a procedure that administrators would follow to address this policy. Also, at that time, teachers would be notified of this change, and this new procedure and policy would be included in the new school year mandated training. At this time, the superintendent does recommend that the Board of Education place this policy, GBIA Teacher Evaluation Appeals, on first read.
Dr. Taylor, you mentioned about a focus group. Is that going to also include teachers?
At this time, we wanted to look at just with principals and assistant principals, being that they would be the evaluator. We certainly can look at including some teachers if that does come about during the focus group.
Okay, just my opinion, I would respectfully suggest that they be included, because they're going to be the ones, kind of affected by this, and so. But it's your baby. Feed it how you want to.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Dr. Taylor, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Taylor, on, and it's very minor, both of the amendments that I want to make to this, just so that it's spelled out and that as teachers they understand. In the first paragraph, line 3 and 4, it says unsatisfactory or ineffective. Are we able to put the scorings according to TEKS under unsatisfactory as being either 1 or ineffective being 2?
Absolutely.
If that could be added. And then the last thing is in paragraph 2, line 7, the decision may be hand-delivered to the teacher or sent by electronic email. I just think that both should be done, sent electronically and hand-delivered.
Okay.
Okay.
Duly noted.
Anyone else?
I would agree with what Mr. Brown just said. I think those are good additions to that.
And I would agree with Mr. Holmes. I think having teacher input on this is huge.
And I agree with the leader also.
And you also may want to include instructional coaches as well on this, being that they are coaching the teachers. My colleagues, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's a good idea. Do we have instructional coaches at every school? I know, or do they have different schools?
Or academic coaches?
Or do they have
In some capacity at all schools.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to be reminded of what we had. I think that's a great idea too, to include them, because he's right. They do help the teachers that we
Okay.
evaluate every year.
All
I
right.
think the teachers would appreciate that also.
Okay. And so, the notes that I have, taken down is for teachers to receive notification both electronically and hand deliver, and then just be more inclusive in our focus group.
Right, and then in lines 3 and 4, where we're putting unsatisfactory, whatever, if the marking is
The
1,
one and
place
2.
that, and if it's ineffective for 2, place that.
Yep.
All right, board members, you've heard the presentation and the recommendation.
I have some more questions, Mr.
Go,
Leader.
okay, go ahead, go ahead.
Being that this is focusing on teacher evaluation appeals, and maybe I should know this, maybe Mr. Aiken can answer this. Is there a current policy on leader evaluation appeals?
This particular policy, does address the TEKS, and so, I would think that, in terms of leader evaluation, that, we do currently have a complaint policy, that would, could in-house encompass that. Is there something more directly?
But is there a policy, like, we can go and look and say that this is GBIA, there's no policy? And so, I think as
Not currently.
policymakers, one of the things that we need to focus on, if we are developing one for teacher evaluation appeals, we also should develop a policy, be on the safe side for leaders who may not necessarily agree with their scorings as well.
I agree.
Is it possible just to include language that would include both?
Well, this one specifically
It's just for-
is coming down for teachers, and so this one has to specifically direct teachers. And so, in
separate
terms of
policy
for
would be
leaders, that
needed.
would be a separate look.
Okay.
So today, how does a leader appeal? A school building leader, how does a school building leader appeal?
And so it is not an appeal, it's not a formal appeal process. However, it's kind of stated here in this section that it would go to, it could go through either through the complaint process, or as we talk about, going back to the supervisor or the department lead at that time. That's how it's handled right now.
So if an assistant principal is dissatisfied with their evaluation, what is their current remedy to have somebody take a second look at it?
And so that next level then would come to central office at that point.
And is there
typically-
currently I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Is there a policy currently in place that allows for that?
Not to my knowledge, and I'll certainly have to go back and look at that, so I'll kind of divert to some help on that one. But I can look at that and see if there's something that we currently have.
There is no policy that currently speaks to leaders, and so I think that's something that the board would need to develop or get staff to develop.
Well, that was my understanding too, that there isn't one. And the complaint policy, basically it's the grievance policy, that expressly accepts grievances from evaluations from that. Of course, that policy gets all the way up to the board if they want to follow all the steps.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So in many ways, Mr. Shepherd, you're correct. In the absence of said policy, it has been the practice to elevate those concerns. They could potentially lead to a grievance, but what we've typically done is elevated the concern to ensure that the processes and the systems that have been employed to get to that score, if you would, to get to that evaluation, was done with fidelity. And so as Dr. Taylor mentioned, in the case of an assistant principal, if he or she had a concern about the evaluation process, it starts with HR, potentially goes over to the executive director who supervises those principals, from there up to my office, notwithstanding or not denying that employee the opportunity to ultimately speak to you. I don't anticipate anything like that happening, but we don't have a formalized policy. But we've tried to implement rules, if you would, that demonstrated loyalty to the employee to ensure that they can see the fidelity. That's been,
So you have an informal policy that allows for what, I think it was Mr. Brown that brought it up?
Yes,
Somebody brought up the issue.
yes, sir.
So if you wanted to adopt a formalized policy, you could use this one that you're considering now, it would probably make it too cumbersome to include administrators because you're not using the same instruments and all that. But use this and just kind of substitute administrators for teachers and leagues for teaks and all that good stuff.
So we would be developing a different policy, is what I'm getting to.
Separate.
Separate policy. Okay, cool. All right. And so, I guess, are you going to ask for a motion, or is there any more discussion?
Or you could just write this as the school system is required to implement a certified evaluation appeals policy.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Or we could rename this, I don't know if we can, based on, the state adopting this, so to speak, but the school system is required to implement a certified evaluation appeals policy. Teachers are certified, leaders are certified, and that would cover.
But I think because they're in two different categories, if I may, because they're in two different categories, Ms. McDonald, it would be best to do two separate policies. So let's, as we start with this one, and then as time goes on, we can develop the one for the leaders.
Okay, and then the timeline on this, I know this first read, the timeline on this obviously would be ready to go out the chute July 1, is that correct? Okay,
That is correct, and the focus group has been identified, and so I'm now at a step where I'll back up and just be more inclusive with the members for the focus group, but for the policy itself, yes.
okay,
July.
and one more question. How were those people going to the focus group identified? How, were they allowed to volunteer? Were they?
Just as good work.
I mean,
Well,
how'd
with
you do
this, what we did was look at various levels. We did identify the principals who are already on the strategic cabinet. So we started with that, and then we expanded out by grade levels with some assistant principals. And we'll do the same with the teachers.
that? Okay, thank you.
I just had a question of Mr. Shepherd. I see, I guess, Mr. Shepherd and Dr. Taylor, I see where Harbin and Hartley, their analysis was included. Well, I guess you all just researched whatever they provided, or did you all deal with them directly? And I'm guessing, Mr. Shepherd, you wasn't involved in laying eyes on this. So how did that work, Dr. Taylor? Do you know, did Harbin and Hartley put out a analysis that for everybody to kind of, piggyback off of or review?
And that is correct. I can provide for you this attachment, which I did not include there, but it was a policy update that was done by the Georgia School Board Association, making school districts aware of this new policy that would need to be adopted, and Harbin, Hartley, and Hawkins did do the overview.
Okay. No need to provide. I'm just wondering how that process worked. So they put out an analysis for everyone to review. Okay.
That's correct.
No problem with that. All right, all questions asked, or do we have any more? All right, we've heard the recommendation. Can we get a motion, please?
I'd like to make a motion that we, that we move
First
on
reading.
the proposed GBIA teacher evaluation appeals policy
First
for
reading.
first reader with the corrections that have been stated today.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brown. Got a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Dawes. All in favor? 5-0. Thank you, Dr. Taylor.
Good work, guys.
Yeah, all right. You all see the consent agenda. We'd like to get a motion to accept as presented. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
By Mr. Dawes, the second.
I'll second, but I just want to make a comment for the consent agenda. For the resignation reasons, 2 meetings ago when we talked, it was asked that a synopsis of those reasons be listed in our packet that we get as information for the board, and I did not see that in this particular packet.
It was on the end of the document.
It's on the page by itself.
Yeah,
But it was also on on the reason for that, if you kept going over to the right, it did.
Online?
Uh-huh.
Okay, because I didn't see that yesterday in mine, I don't see it
See
today.
if I can pull it up real quick.
I think he has that.
Yeah, but the reason. Yeah, but there's discussion, so when Dr. Taylor presented, she said that there's a place where they're able to type out whatever those reasons are. So I'm gonna go ahead and defer to Soup for this one, so that it can be explained. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Brown. I think what you may be referring to is if those employees who have separated with the district, if they completed an exit exam
Correct.
and left some type of narrative, if that's what you're asking for, the question would be whether or not any of these employees completed the,
No.
and that was the caveat. We would only be able to supply that type of information provided that they would
Do the
complete the, yes, sir.
Because, I mean, because they wouldn't do an exit until the end of the school year. So that when we know that they're leaving, but we will get that updated information.
And that is correct. Many employees, if they leave mid-year, do not complete the exit survey. However, in the past, most of the exit data does come at the end of the year.
Okay, correct. Like, I know I'm good with technology, and I just know I missed it. It wasn't, because it wasn't there. And I hope my colleagues now understand.
I misunderstood what you're asking.
Okay, all right, so we're on the same page. Okay, we good then.
With the exception, Mr. Chairman, technically, the reasons for resignation really shouldn't be on the consent agenda because the board is not taking action
Right.
on the reasons that the employees have separated
And
employment
see,
with us.
to validate what Mr. Shepherd said, I think the discussion when this was brought up for it to be provided, that it would be given in a, separate document, not included, in this packet, because it's for public viewing. So you're correct. We decided that was not gonna be something that everyone would have privy to, just the board.
Well, there's areas that only the board members can see.
Right,
Right.
right.
My point is it's listed as an action item under the consent agenda.
Right, shouldn't be an
Shouldn't
action item. Right, okay. As we say in the Lord, all mind and hearts clear?
For real.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? All right, 5-0. Thank you. All righty, presentation and discussions. Lonnie? You were, okay. GSCS
Mr. Chair.
models
Mr.
of
Chair.
instructions.
I just got a text from someone that says we're offline. So I just want to be sure we're online. Thank you, Mr. Harper. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Jones and Ms. Crawford.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Ashley Crawford and I are here to share information regarding the Models of Instruction subcommittee work that focused on instructional models for the 21-22 school year. And just a bit of backstory, if I may. This subcommittee was formed out of the planning task force led by Dr. Kennedy. Dr. Kennedy asked for me to comprise a subcommittee together to look at these instructional models and to make sure that we look at that virtual piece going into the following school year. So from there, a subcommittee was formed to focus on those models of instruction. So in the brainstorming phase and looking at all of the myriad of options that could be out there, it literally was put up on a dry erase board, everything on the mat that we could think of that could be possible in models of instruction. Then we took all of those brainstorming ideas to say, okay, these three are the same. One just happened to mention elementary, one happened to mention middle, one happened to mention high school. So we married the models where they could be married, and some of the other pieces that we looked at were, oh, okay, wait a minute, this idea, this is a hybrid piece of what we're doing now. And so all of those ideas were then put into and funneled down into 4 models of instruction that we'll share with you today. With those models of instruction, we wanted to create teams for each of the models to study. So each team was tasked with studying and giving feedback on district capability and feasibility with a myriad of considerations that we also brainstormed to be able to have each team consider. So just a little bit of that backstory. Each of the model teams, and you'll see them referenced as Model A, B, C, and D, and not to jump on you, sometimes I revert to 1, 2, 3, and 4. I will do my best to stay in the A, B, C, D realm. But we wanted to make sure they were comprised of K-12 teacher representation, administrators at the school level, and district office administrators as well. So each of the 4 models had elementary, middle, and high school representation, and we felt that was extremely important to have. In addition, we utilized existing meetings with DPAC, with district meetings for students and parents and community members to give feedback on the various models as well. So on the next slide that you see, we shared with you who comprised each of the model teams. And out beside them, you'll see if they were a teacher at elementary, middle, or high, if they were a school administrator or district level administrator. And we also, just for you to know, put the student meeting and parent meeting dates up there as well. So as stated before, these subcommittees explored the models, and there were several considerations that went across, gosh, two, 3, 4 Google Docs. Some that we named here, such as location, curriculum, hours of operation, staff members, diploma issuance. It just went on. Assessments. There were a myriad of things we asked them to consider when they are looking at the model to gauge our feasibility and capability as a district to do this, plan for it appropriately, to support students and schools and parents for the upcoming school year.
Can I ask just a quick question?
Yes.
So, looking at this, in addition to the names that are here, there was also parent input and student input?
Yes.
I thought I heard that, I just wanted to clarify.
And Ashley led the student conversations in those meetings, and I did the parent and community. So if you look at this slide, we're going to go over the models for you, but I just wanted to reiterate these 4 models. It was interesting in how we were drilling down from all of the ideas that were out there, and how they honestly all came back and fit into these 4 models. So Model A, this team looked at GSCS teachers face-to-face and virtual. So you see the description here. It's simultaneous with teachers teaching both face-to-face and virtual students at the same time. This is our current model. We felt it important to put this as one of the models, not only to honor the hard work and effort that our teachers have just risen to the occasion with, but also for us to study and look at what has emerged that we could modify, possibly what have we learned that could make this process better. And so we felt it very important to ensure we had this model to be studied as well. The Model B that you see is GSCS teachers assigned to face-to-face or virtual. So in that description, the GSCS teachers identified for face-to-face only classes and separate GSCS teachers with virtual classrooms using Google Classroom. So it is either or. With this particular model, we wanted to ensure that we studied and had a team study that same feasibility and capability of this being possible at this time of the school year. So Model C that you see, just to be upfront, this is the most complex model. And so when we were taking all of the brainstorming ideas, truly, to be honest with you, it came down to 3 models. Because the 4th model that you're going to see in this packet, we actually broke it off because we realized Model C was so large. So what you see here on Model C, GSCS teachers assigned to face-to-face, then a virtual platform component where GSCS teachers are using Google Classroom, and or an external teacher use with an external platform. So you can already see just in the model how many avenues of study and discussion this could have. So when you see in the description, GSCS teachers identified for face-to-face only, looking at that for all P through 12 classrooms. The GSCS virtual teachers, this team had to study its use for just P through 5. Do we need to look at it and expand it to P through 8? And then look at it through the lens of P12. In addition, the virtual option had to be explored with a purchase platform. So this is for students who've selected to be 100% virtual while other students are coming face-to-face. But again, we had to look at this external purchase platform through the lens of P12. Do we look at 612? Do we look at 912? And what are the implications of that? There are significant, there are nuances, but then there are significant implications by grade band that we had to consider in these models of instruction. Just an example in how you'll see, we always have to be cognizant at with credit-bearing courses and decisions that we're making. So it may sound great for P7, but if we have 8th graders doing high school credit courses and they're earning credit, and grades 9 through 12 and they're earning credit, we always have to layer and look at that through a different lens. So this particular model, and Ashley Crawford and Larry Jones were the chairpersons for that, it was involved. So I wanted to be able to share that in how this particular team had to look at the work. In addition, you see the next one, which is Model D, Separate Virtual Academy. This was at one time part of Model C. But because when we started digging into the work and all of the considerations, we quickly realized we need to break that off and it needs to be its own study, model to be studied. So a separate virtual academy is Model D. That description, separate virtual academy, will be created for students who want to remain in the virtual setting. So on this link, I wanted to go ahead and share with you just the template. Now, the actual document is far and wide because the teams actually recorded all of their information. But we wanted to share this with you. So when I mentioned earlier about the considerations in the study each team had to do, You see here on the left side of the screen, there were a myriad of things that were pre-populated for the teams to study, but also through the team discussions, there were things that came up that we quickly realized, hold on a minute, that may have implications across all models. We're going to add it in to the bottom of the considerations piece. So you see consideration of location, of virtual teachers. You see curriculum had to be considered, assessments, funding sources, materials needed. Are there any additional staff members needed for the particular model? What about professional learning? How will we operate with a purchase platform and what needs to happen there? What about our students who receive specialized instruction, who have 504 plans, who are special needs students, who receive ESOL, gifted service? How will that look? What will we do in a virtual setting with diploma issuance? How will that work? Enrollment, transportation. You see the myriad of things that had to be considered. We also, in the document, had what we call a landing page, if you will, where questions emerged in the study groups, in the study teams, that the study teams may not have had the answer to. And we wanted to be able to capture that in one of the tabs at the bottom of the Google document so we could revisit it. Also, we wanted to capture additional considerations that may have to be looked at depending on the decision of the model moving forward. So I just wanted to share this with you to let you see the multitude of things that had to be looked at within the study of each individual model. Thank you, Lonnie. So in the timeline we wanted to share with you, there were planning meetings in early March, as well as information taken to the Instructional Services Division meeting on the plan moving forward with the 4 models, how the teams would be broken up, what the considerations would be. In addition, we met, where you see on March 9th, Ashley Crawford, myself met with Dr. Kennedy to review all of that to ensure we were in alignment with what was being tasked of us from the planning task force in forming a subcommittee. You also see here this information was shared at the planning task force meeting, Dr. Kennedy's meeting. The first Models of Instruction full subcommittee meeting took place where we did the entire overview of the work. On the 29th of March, you see we had a second Models of Instruction full subcommittee meeting where the committee chairs did a report out of where they were at that point in time. When you go into April, we wanted to have an additional Models of Instruction subcommittee meeting to do additional report out because each of these teams had to have their own meeting dates to do the work, and you see that asterisk at the bottom of the page. On April 21st, we had a chairperson's meeting to hear the feedback from each individual model. You also see on the 22nd, we gave an update to Dr. Kennedy on the Models of Instruction teamwork that was done. Also, we had that afternoon the full subcommittee pulled together of the Models of Instruction that also met with Dr. Kennedy's planning task force meeting participants. So that committee final report out could be shared with everyone. On the 26th, the Models of Instruction Committee share out happened at Cabinet. And then to end the Models of Instruction timeline piece, we had the 27th to share out with the Board of Education at today's work session. So, brings me to a questions page. And just wanted to know, did you have any questions for us? Yes.
Board members, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to try to keep my composure
Okay?
because I think this board, number one, let me preface this. Let me say this first. How were teachers chosen to be on these different model committees?
I worked from the list of teachers of the year for each school, and then we placed them elementary, middle, and high on each group. So most of them were teachers of the year for that school.
Were the teachers on these different models, did they survey the teachers in their buildings with regard to what this system will do this fall?
That was not an ask of them.
Excuse me?
That was not an ask of them. The task force teams, their task was to take that particular model with the considerations to gauge its feasibility and its capability. We did not ask those participants to go back and do survey of their staff or their peers on their staff, or take anything to administrators to then survey staff. That was not an ask.
So you're telling me that only 14 teachers out of this county system were part of this, period? Yeah, the answer is yes, because I've done the math. 23% of our teachers are represented on these 4 models. 14 teachers. Do you see that there is just something wrong with that? But yet, I can tell you that 24 or 42% of county admin are on these models. So my point is this: don't you think that it's best to get information from the people that have been in the trenches for the last 13 months rather than just 14 teachers in this whole entire system? I tell you, I talked to Mr. Holmes yesterday because he's my leader. And when I got this packet to my door on Thursday, I have been upset since Thursday about this because this is wrong. Because we're not asking the people that have been in the trenches, because it's, number one, it's so easy and it's so apparent that we should be. So you tell me why we didn't do that. And this board, by now, everyone in this room should know, we want teacher input, we want parent input, we want student input. Tell me about the parent meeting. How many people were there?
22.
Where was it held?
It was virtual.
Virtual. How many students were there, and how many participated in the student meetings?
So the survey that I have from the community and the students has 33 total. Students in the first meeting, I had 4. In the second meeting, I had a classroom full, I would say approximately 15. And then the third meeting, I would say I had right around 8.
And how were those advertised? Quite frankly, I would like to have come to 1 or 2 of them, perhaps. How were they advertised?
We utilized existing DPAC meeting dates as well as student meeting dates in the time frame that we had to do the work, Ms. McDonald. So one of our asks was of federal programs, what existing meetings do you have on the docket that we can get on those agendas to be able to try to get some feedback? And if I may, and I don't know if you are done right here, I would like to be able to speak to a couple of things that you said and you asked. So I appreciate your feedback. I find myself standing here in a place that feels like you don't believe that we value that input.
You're right.
And I'd like an opportunity to speak to it. So We do ensure that we have student, parent, teacher representation. When you delineated the line about the people in the trenches, just because they're administrators doesn't mean they're not in the trenches.
Ms. Jones,
Uh,
let me, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Ms. McDonald, thank you for that feedback. I think what we did not intend to present is the appearance of work happening to staff. I'm going to ask that the board trust me in knowing that this was an effort to collect information. I sense that we could have gone a few steps deeper. I'll make note of that and ensure that we're able to articulate that. But I don't want you to think that, one, out of this presentation, that it was going to be the recommendation of any one person that says something is better than the other. This was about going all the way back to when we weren't quite sure what next year would hold, how might school look. What we were trying to figure out based on our capacity, and I've shared that with you all, how do we best educate our students? And how do we do that within the, I'm going to say, constraints or confines that we already have? I'll ask that all of us be reminded, part of this conversation was prefaced when we made the commitment to not negatively impact teacher staffing allotments. So in many ways, we had to have conversations around what is there in terms of the option for those who want a virtual option. How might we do it? And what are the implications with regards to staffing, funding, and logistics? I don't want this conversation to give the impression that central office does not recognize the work of those who are providing instruction. I think I've shared with you all, as far as I see it, there are two types of people in this organization: those who teach and those who support them. This was an opportunity for us to figure out how might we best support teachers, particularly when the masses are asking that we not continue to do what we're currently doing. But there are families who are asking for us to try to find a way to provide a virtual option that has worked better than the in-person option. The problem and the crux for me is we're staffing schools as if no one wants a virtual option. And we've communicated and committed to teachers and principals that we would not have them do both. But I needed to have the data with regards to what it would look like or could look like so that I could speak to you and this community with confidence of what we would be able to do. Notwithstanding that you may not prefer the options, but within our capacity, from the standpoint of doing it well, from the standpoint of ensuring that we can provide a quality education experience, I needed to know what we were capable of. I understand the frustration. It was expressed by the 5th graders at Moreland. It was expressed by the 7th graders at Kennedy, and it's been expressed by the parents, this board, the staff. I understand all of that. What I wanted you to take from this conversation was to know that the staff committed to doing the work. That work had been completed. I think what you're saying is we may have missed the perspective of those, many of those. We may have missed representation from many of those in the classroom. Based on those numbers, I would agree. Our understanding, based on the teachers of the year, is that they understood the experiences of their colleagues. The other side of that, we still had to have instruction. And so I did not want to compromise teachers sitting here talking and students sitting in front of subs or whoever else we could get to cover the class, because we have a shortage of those as well. More competing interests. I know that Mrs. Jones wanted to ensure that you understood her perspective. I wanted you and she and everyone else to understand the perspective. We've got to figure out what we're going to be able to do and do it well. on top of ensuring that we can meet our students where they are, but ensuring that we don't break the backs of our staff doing so. And so that's what this work was about. That's what I was hoping to be able to communicate. I sense that we may have missed some opportunities to go deeper with representation, but I tend to believe if anyone were to reach out to a teacher at a given school, doesn't matter which, they'd tell you they'll do whatever we ask them, but they prefer not to do both at the same time. And that's what we were trying to affirm in this regard.
Well, and I appreciate that, Mr. Simmons. I just, as a former educator, and I know I'm passionate about teachers, and I've told you all before, I always will be. As long as I have breath in me, I always will be, and I will go to bat for them. I'm going to go to bat for every teachers, parents, kids, employees, period. That's it. Me sitting here is not about me. However, I just know in my own experience that the 3 teachers in Model A, 3 in B, C, and D, had they had the opportunity to get feedback, however, from their own peers in their own buildings, it might have been totally different. Might have looked totally different. And this is not a personal issue. And, I've said this before in front of you guys. This is not personal for anyone. This is about what's doing best for our kids and our employees. And I just feel like that we missed the boat. And that's okay. We just got to do better. And this board, just so you know, is committed to including the masses.
I understand.
That's it.
Yes, ma'am.
So forgive me if I got out of line. I didn't mean to. When I start talking and I'm passionate about it, I get, but that's why I'm here. I'm here for the people I represent, and the kids I represent, and the parents I represent, and the employees I represent. And I'm not going to give it up. So.
Any other
Right.
questions?
Any other questions or comments?
So what are the next steps?
So the next steps, Mr. Doss, is for me to communicate with you and the community where I believe our capacity enables us to best serve our students. And truth be told, it's going to include face-to-face, obviously. But with regards to the commitment that we made 3 months ago, not to disturb the staffing allotments, I see us using an external learning platform. The reason for that, as was shown in the Google document, we don't have the ability to take the teachers that we recently committed to providing and asking them to cover both. It's really no different than what they're doing now, and what I mean by that is trying to teach students who are in front of them in person and who are in front of them on their device. Another unintended consequence is we've got to do more with educating our families with regards to what the virtual option means. And what I mean by that is I've experienced in speaking with in speaking with staff and being on their campuses, students who were designated to be in person, when life happens at home, the parent opts to make them virtual for the day. The problem that creates is the teacher hadn't planned for them to be virtual for the day. And so now we're back to having a non-desired learning experience for that child. And that's because the option is just an option, but it's not viable. And so if we have an external platform with an external provider, then that student, that family is saying, this is the way that I'm going to go about school. Those in-person teachers, those in-person learners are committed to one another and not having to navigate, if you would, the nuances of keeping up with those that you can and those that you can't see. That's just a difficult lift. So the next step is to communicate, now that I have a clearer understanding of our capacity, communicate that virtual option, which is simply, if you want virtual, you will sign up, we will communicate with you, we will articulate what virtual will look and feel like for you and your family. We will help you to understand what the school's role is in that process. And then if that's what you want, go for it. But we won't be able to navigate those nuances for you and keep up with the 20 or so students in the classroom. I just need to know the number of families who want that option. The other side of that was the risk of having too many options and everyone wanting various options and we not having the capacity to do any of them well. And so again, I think what I heard clearly from this board as late as or as early as February, now is not the time for schools to lose teachers. I can't commit to you that a teacher at a specific elementary school or grade level would only be able to commit to that school and grade level. But in the eyes and the minds of a parent, my child's teacher is my child's teacher. But the way it looks now, I could have a teacher teaching kids from all over the system. Those are relationships we're not equipped to be able to build and expect positive learning outcomes. So succinctly, next step is we're going to communicate with families. This is what instruction will look like for the 21-22 school year. You'll be in person. We're going to put our best foot forward. Or you can choose to be virtual, what I call anytime learning. But our teachers need to be able to go to sleep. And if your child prefers to wake up at 5 in the afternoon to begin their day, so be it. Because we have those instances. And it's not fair for our teachers to try and figure out how to navigate supporting all of those on top of their days and the children that we're trying to serve in that space. That's what I was needing to learn from this work.
I just have one more.
Yes, ma'am.
What is the definition of a purchased platform?
Much like you've probably heard of Edgenuity.
Yes.
That's a purchased platform.
I thought it was. I just
Yes,
wanted
ma'am.
clarification on it.
Again, what I call anytime learning, because in some ways, that's what we're saying. The caveat and non-intended consequence is the notion that a child may want to reach out to a teacher at 8 o'clock in the evening when that teacher has been at school since 7 o'clock in the morning. It's going to be hard to keep them here if those are the parameters that we give them. I've heard from this board we've got to figure out how to retain them. All of that is a part of the options, if you would, that we're offering.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones, Ms. Crawford. All right. Budget update, Mr. Byron Jones.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman,
Good evening.
Board. Good to see you again. I'm going to attempt to, I always say I'm going to be brief when I get up here, so I'm going to attempt to really do it this time. In conversations with the superintendent, we felt it was important to kind of preempt what we've got coming in the next couple of weeks. So this will be an attempt to give you some potential budget inclusions and maybe just an update. Next week, you should be getting the tentative budget, so you'll get more of an in-depth budget book. We're going to try to replicate that process with maybe a few little tweaks so it'll look familiar for you. So tonight is to give you some high-level thoughts, and I'll ad-lib some in here because some of these numbers will change. So Lonnie's going to run the clicker thing for me. On the second page here, these are some approximate numbers for funding, and this is, when that says appropriation, that's meant to mean the spending. So for example, general fund, $97.5 million. Depending on how we decide to use the reserve or whether we use some CARES money to offset a potential deficit, if we do that, then that spending number will come down. So for example, last year when I came on board, it was pretty much already put to bed that there was going to be some usage of CARES money to offset maybe our assistant principal salaries, and those were moved over to CARES 1. And then there was an amount of the reserve for approximately $2 million that was used. So your spending would have potentially been about that amount anyway, but when it was all said and done, the amount came down to somewhere around 92 to 94 million. Special revenue, that's a lot more than normal, and that's simply because we look at the prior year's grants, original grants. So for example, FY21's original title grants, and then I have added the full amount of CARES 2 into that. So 16 million plus 14 million is 30 million. We obviously might make the decision to split that grant between 2 years, so that 30 million may be a little less when you get the tentative budget. Capital projects, and I've got some slides that talk about this a little bit later. In talking with Mr. Ballard and or Mr. Akins, we've talking about 4 potential projects that might spend up some of the before SPOS that still have some money left in them, so that is a little bit higher than normal as far as the spending that you've seen. There's a need to do that, and the superintendent and I have talked about that. You'll be getting more information about that. Some of those monies are left over from prior years that need to be utilized, the taxpayers have paid for. Nutrition fund, $7 million is probably a little bit high of a number. That'll come down when I present it to you next week. We're looking at some options on nutrition that would give us a waiver for FY22 that we did not know when I put this presentation together last week. And then a couple of you have heard me talk about the CEP program, community eligibility provision. Some of our neighboring districts are doing that. There's some choices of that may be, the superintendent may be recommending to you in the coming weeks. We're going to have a discussion about that with the board, the decision union. That would affect our reimbursement rates and whether children are paying for their meals or not going forward into the next year. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Jones, I think over the weekend, I read where the USDA has already waived free and reduced lunch and breakfast for kids for 21, 22.
That's what I had to have this ready last Wednesday to
right.
meet somebody's timeline.
Right.
So I found that out this weekend.
Right.
And SSO, seamless summer option.
But that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I'm going to speak to that a little bit
Okay.
later in the presentation. So this $7 million may be a little bit different. So the next page, state revenues. If you remember in the retreat, I was showing y'all a document that you said you might not have seen before. It was kind of some QBE allocation sheets. We still haven't gotten the FY22 official looking document, but we do have kind of a watered down version that has all of the counties in the state, and I'll provide that to you in your book. But these are pretty firm numbers. I wanted to point you to the fact that we're still only gaining approximately 500 grand through the restoration of austerity, which was a 60% cut last year that we're getting back. That's a good thing, but then when you add or take away from that approximate $2 million in enrollment decline, that cancels that out. You remember I used the word hold harmless, and I think the figure is 1.7 million, so I'm rounding it up a little bit. On top of that, our low wealth ranking changed. I think we sent that out to you in a document, but that's costing us 1.3 million. So when you add all those together, it's really only a net gain of 400,000 to 500,000. It's not a big pickup of 3 million. So you just need to have a basic understanding of that. When you hear the governor, for example, we're giving you the money back, there's still some other things in the formula that work against that. So just keep that in context. You've seen this slide before. 9321 was the FY21 midterm number. That's the one I showed you at the retreat, and then they verified that for our initial allotment sheet for 22. So that's about 450 kids less. If you use an approximate $5,000 a child value, that's about $2 million. So that's working against us as well. So keep that in mind. If we're leaving things whole for the next year, whether it's teacher allotments, whether it's certain funding ways, that will be something that plays into the spending levels and revenues that we have to compare. Another little summary for general fund. These numbers on state don't exactly match up because there's some grants in addition to our state QBE money that get added in. The local number is up a little bit because I went ahead and examined the TAV, title ad valorem tax. That's really performing well. That's the vehicle purchases. This county is really exceeding that amount that's coming in every month. So if you look all the way down, you see some approximate increases in revenue. Again, they could have been higher based on if our enrollment would not have declined in equalization. Next slide. These are some potential, not necessarily proposed yet, but potential items. You're familiar with some of these. 175-day counter. You all have already approved that. We're looking at the full work year for counter for staff. Annually, you all have a decision to make of whether you want to fund step increases. This isn't necessarily salary increases, changing the scale necessarily for new scales, but this is if somebody's on step 19, do you grant them step 20? And then there's the teacher scale, and then there's some classified scales. So this is considering every one of those and treating them all the same when I put 1.1 million. The public school retirement plan, you all have annually adopted a 3% contribution to that. These are for people who are not eligible for teachers' retirement system. So there's a match, or not necessarily a match, but there's a contribution put in there of their salary. So that would be 160 grand is about how much that is a year. Health insurance should remain the same for next year. I think we've talked about it. If you didn't know, it's $945 a month. If an employee chooses health insurance, that's our match. So it's about $11,340 a year if they choose. We do have a little bit of an incentive program that the district adopted a few years back where if somebody declines the health insurance under certain circumstances, they can receive a supplement in their check, and we save the difference, $11,000 and whatever it is, $2,000. So that's something that Griffin-Spalding and a lot of districts have put that in, and we have a few people that partake in that. TRS is also slated to go up just a little bit. If you remember last year, I think in your budget book, it went down about 2%. So, I mean, that was a large amount of savings that helped the budget be offset on some declines. So it is slated to go up just a little bit in the coming year. Still on general fund, Superintendent was talking about this a while ago, the teacher allotment discussion. If you'll remember that, we got some preliminary data probably back in February I shared with the schools. This is what you could lose based on formula, based on no subjectivity. This is just what the number says. And when we felt comfortable about the decision, we went ahead and told them that they will be remaining whole for that. That's about $2 million. So that's the main thing that's impacting the general fund there. COVID, just to recognize that, we will have the opportunity to offset any decreases, and there's limitations on the money on what can be qualified to do that with, use that for. Maintaining operations is the main one that we have to do a checkbox to send that into the feds to leave teachers whole or to move salaries to another fund. That's one of the things we did last year. We'll be looking at that for next year as well. And just again, transfers out of the general fund to other funds that we track separately are listed at the bottom. Those are the figures that are annually done. That'd probably be about the same figures for this coming year.
Mr. Jones,
Yes, sir.
on that transfer to pre-kindergarten, what does that entail?
The main reason for that, the state funds a certain amount of classrooms for the district, and you can have up to, I believe it's 22 or so with a parapro that's mandated, teacher and parapro in the classroom. Griffin-Spalding has traditionally left the teachers on the same pay scale as K through 12 teachers, and that is a choice. Back in, I think, 2012, the state changed the funding formula and they froze the reimbursements. A lot of districts redid their scale. We actually did that where I was at, but here, and then once we did it, we wondered if we should have done it or not, because then you get into recruiting efforts for different types of positions. So I think the district here, I don't know how long this goes back, it may have been that way forever. That's the main reason of what's causing that. Because you've got to spend $1,000 a classroom, you got some mandated things you have to do. If you don't, you got to give the money back.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Just to wrap up the general fund piece, again, these are approximates. So those numbers for 97.5 could come down, and also the difference could go up. I mean, don't be surprised if I come back in here and I'm telling you that the difference is actually $4.5 million. We've been having discussions, multiple discussions, trying to understand how I'm different than a prior person, how Mr. Simmons is different than a prior person. Everybody in here is trying to get used to me, him, all of it. So we're trying to put together a budget that you can support, that superintendent can recommend, but there are many variables in this thing. I mean, this is not normal. So we're going to urge you to support us and trust us when we give you something to approve. So these fund balances, I'm using 16.2. I think we closed out last year at 19, so I'm giving you a low number just based on budget. Again, I'll sure that up before we give you a budget to actually approve.
So that deficit, that I know we used some money out of that fund balance because we haven't received money from the state, correct? So once we receive that money, that's where that offset will be able to affect money that we use out of there.
If we plan a budget and are in deficit in the budget, we can apportion a certain amount of fund balance to use, or we could say CARES is going to cover the $3.6 million, and this is how we're going to shift these salaries over to here to CARES for the next year or two. Mm-hmm. The issue is when the year or two comes, and there's not a CARES 4 or 5, you're going to have some things to to accept or decline a recocation on.
See, I'm still answering to C.A. Collier. You know,
I
that
still
fund-
don't, I
that
still
fund-
don't know what that's about.
I can hear him in my ear as I look at that number going down.
Well, one day, as soon as you adopt this recommended budget, how about telling me what that's all about?
Okay.
That was a snippet on the general fund. I'm gonna give you a little highlight on the other funds. So is there any questions so far on general fund itself? Y'all know what that is. That's your state money, your $60 million, your tax money from the millage rate, a little bit of Medicaid reimbursement money, things like that, that all add up to $90 to $100 million. Okay. On our nutrition, again, I filled this out before we got some additional information. You know, we've talked about this over and over. Just in our financial report next Tuesday for the month of March, you'll see that the nutrition is going to be about 1.2 million in deficit in the current year. Luckily, they had fund balance from the prior year, but they've basically eaten all that up. So I'm going to have to make them whole because they can't, by law, end the year in a deficit. If you do, you got to have a deficit elimination plan. You've got to adopt monthly things. We got to run stuff in the newspaper, and we have the wherewithal to make them whole out of the general fund. We just need to set up a process that we don't have to continually do that from now on. And that's why I listed this $1 million here. We may have to make them whole in FY21. That's the year we're in right now.
But is that more, Mr. Jones, is that more just what we've all been through the last year? Is that more related to that?
Current.
Historically in our system? Are all systems pretty much all experiencing this, or is that
All-
unique only to us, or?
In the current year, most systems are experiencing it.
Okay,
The budget last year that you all adopted showed that nutrition was going to intentionally use $435,000 of their $1.2 million of fund balance to balance and not require the general fund to subsidize. Prior years, the general fund has subsidized, like that pre-K item that he was just talking about. This year, it's not designed, but we don't have a choice. I mean, we're going to have to subsidize them because they've had no revenue reimbursement. So I'm going to have to make a transfer, superintendent approve, and we're going to have to do a budget amendment to the board to approve in June. Just know that's going to have to happen. I mean, we don't have a choice on that. But we do have a choice to try to be self-sustaining in the future. That is something we can do. And regardless of that decision for the CEP process I was telling you about, next year we're under a different waiver that will ensure that all children eat free. And as long as they are attending school, we know that the participation will be high. And I think they can also serve them virtual underneath the SSO, and that's maybe a strategy we can figure out how to, I don't know, once a week, twice a week, whatever, all that with transportation, I don't know how we work all that out, but that's, you know. So talking to Robert today, Robert Wheeler, we worked out a budget that you'll see next Tuesday that I think they'll be able to self-sustain, and maybe we won't have to budget a transfer, and then if we get in this situation again, we may just have to do it. I mean, you're just gonna need to know the options on how we plan it out.
thank you.
Speaking of Mr. Wheeler, y'all make sure y'all keep a close eye on him. I saw him walking down 6th Street like he was in a daze, like Steve, what's his name, from The Jerk, you know, with the chair on it.
Come on,
He was like he was in a daze, so I don't know if that was after that meeting with you or not.
That would have been about 3
Huh?
o'clock, 3 o'clock.
Yeah, about 3 o'clock.
Well, he agreed with my analysis.
He agreed. Okay.
So on nutrition, on nutrition, let me paraphrase. So what I'm saying is SSO, Seamless Summer Option, I think that's the acronym, that's what we're under next year. We have a waiver. We just found out about it like a week ago. But we may be coming to talking to you about CEP, which is a long-term strategy, has other implications. So just stay tuned on whether or not that'll come to fruition. So analysis right now is worried about next year. So we should be good, hopefully, on that. Special Revenue Fund, as I told you before, that $30 million may be different when I bring it to you for the actual proposed budget. Again, I told you we adopt initial budgets until the official allotments come in because there's other money carryover that's involved in that from prior years. CARES Act 2 is actually 14.6 million. We're trying to strategize on how to use that over 2 years. The CARES 3 money is 30 plus million, and there are timelines. I didn't really talk a lot about that in this presentation, but there may have to be a usage of that next year as well. Pre-K, I mentioned them. We've talked about them, 175 and 190 as far as the students and teachers. I told you about the 170, and we had a brief discussion about the teacher salary scale as it relates to them. On our SPLOST, we've talked about this monthly. It's really strong on what's being brought in for the district. It's about a little over 8 million through the receipts through March. So that's really trending higher than the budget that was adopted here in the district. I did want to make mention of these are the roundabout numbers that are still available for the prior 3 SPLOST that we're trying to come up with a strategy. And when I talked about the 20 million, which we'll show it on the next slide, we're trying to make best use of those monies to improve the district, improve the facilities. But that gives you a little snapshot on what the balances are. Debt service fund, that should be getting zeroed out based on everybody understands we paid the bonds off. We may still show that with zeros on our funding structure, but we won't need to keep talking about it. I mean, there's about 3,000, 4,000 left in the account. I think we have a disclosure form we have to file, and then we'll move that money back to regular SPLOST operating account. So here's a little bit of tidbits on the 4 SPLOST that we had. I tried to just list out a couple of items that were still priority in the SPLOST for FY22. There are other priorities in SPLOST 6, but I'm focusing only on the 12 months coming up. You all are familiar with the 3 before I started working here, 3, 4, and 5. Those are items that are still there, maybe haven't been completed. I do think there's a plan to fast track some of that on. I mean, we are maintaining 4 different accounts for that. But Mr. Akins and I have been talking about that in his planning with the superintendent. I think you'll see some things on that. Yes, ma'am.
Just have a quick question, Mr. Akins. When will I know we approved it, I don't quite remember when will the transportation department undergo the beginnings of the new?
That is actually scheduled, I believe, in year 4 of the SPLOST.
Which one is that? Is it
6.
6? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's the one that we incurred. Now, we've been hopeful to move some of this up because funds have been coming in a little better than anticipated, but I believe that's where it's projected, but we're continuously looking to see if we can move some of those up because, as you know, the schools have to be done in a certain order by
Sure.
the state, but the others, we do have some flexibility.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on our prioritization list? Okay, coming down to the end here, just in summary, we will present you balanced budgets. We will get there by a couple of ways. One will be fund balance usage. One will be CARES dollars offsets. Full work schedule for employees, instructional calendar, you've seen that. Potential step increase, you have the authority to approve or disapprove that. COVID is still an issue we're dealing with. Its impact is what we've been talking about tonight. When I said potential meal increases, that's something that if we decided to stay normal and didn't get the waiver for next year and didn't get CEP, there would have to be a discussion about that, which about to undergo a review that I don't think's been done in the district for 7 or 8 years, and that may be something that'd be mandated to the board. So I just list that for you now. That's not even gonna matter next year. So I told you about CEP and CARES. Our timetable, I wrote this up, and then I went back and looked at a little bit of what's been done in the past. So our goal would be to give you a tentative budget next Monday. We will have to advertise a public hearing, and I'm wondering in the past if the tentative budget may have been advertised at the same time versus just we're going to have a public hearing. I've done it the way I just explained. So this is probably what we're going to do, but the way we advertise it may be a little bit different. But we're going to plan to have 2 public hearings. One may be the 11th, which would have to be a meeting that is not on your regular meetings. The 4th and the 18th, you're here anyway. I believe there has to be 14 days between the tentative approval and the final approval. So if we can fit that in by June 1st, we're done, not June 15th. But either way, I've assured the superintendent that you won't be asked to sign a spending resolution. So that's our aggressive timeline. We've still got a lot of work to do to get you something in your hands that you can approve, but I think we're well on our way. Be glad to take any more questions you have.
I got one, Mr. Jones.
Yes.
You know, we had that discussion about those employees that kind of fell in the crack of the, don't want to call it a bonus, you know, the 1,005 or 500. What was the resolution? Have we gotten a resolution?
Yes, sir. We went back and looked at a few employees, and if there was anybody that, and remember I told you about the long-term substitutes. Those were specifically listed as a funding mechanism, and there were a couple in there that met the threshold, so we went back and restored that. We did get a question about lay coaches.
Right.
And one of the people, I'm trying to remember, I don't remember his name, but, because I talked to a couple of these people individually. He qualified under the long-term substitute, not the lay coach, so he was made whole based on the long-term substitute. Lay coaches, we've got two different types of coaches. We've got coaches that have a regular job with the school system, and then they're working at maybe getting a supplement in addition to extra hours. And then we've got lay coaches who may work a full-time, that sign a contract, and it's not even funded through our payroll system. We're not receiving FTE money or CPI money, and those are excluded. So if it's a person
Excluded? Okay.
yes. So that clear delineation is what I hope I'm trying to clear up. The ones that were doing additional labor were funded because of the job during the day.
Right. Okay.
But
okay.
I did personally take several phone calls, several emails, and I tried to return any calls that came my way. So.
Okay, all right, appreciate that. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. All right. Right now, we have board member comment, and we'll start to my right this time, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to say hello to everybody out there, to our staff, to our faculty, to scholars. Thank you so much for what you're doing. This is School Library Month, and so as we celebrate our school librarians and school libraries, I have put together a District 1 proclamation for you, and each school media specialist will get one. We celebrate you for National School Library Month. The work that you do is greatly appreciated. Also on Monday, May 10th, District 1 Senior Spotlight will be honoring graduates from A.Z. Kelsey, Griffin High School, and Spalding High School. It will be on May 10th at 6:30 at the College and Career Academy. And so we look forward to having you out. And that concludes my announcements, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Cook?
Good evening. Again, I want to thank our teachers, our students, our administrators, our staff for what they've done this year. It's been an incredible year, and we have a lot to celebrate at the end of this year. We came through COVID. It was a great team effort, and we're all excited about graduation for our seniors. Again, thanks to our staff for all you do for all of us. You are the heart of what we do with our board meetings, and we certainly appreciate all the hard work that you do. So again, kudos to each one of you. Thanks.
Ms. McDonough?
Just wanted to say thank you to all of our employees in this room and outside of this room for what you do on a daily basis. As Ms. Cook indicated, it's been a rough year for all of us, and I always just want to say thank you.
I would just say the same thing. 3 of the events, new superintendent, COVID, and dealing with what we've had to deal with interim situations, any of those are very difficult. And so the ability for you to keep doing what you're doing, and our teachers, for them being able to do what they're doing, I'm glad that we are working hard to not ask them to do the same thing next year. I think that's huge. And so Graduation's close. It's almost there. Don't lose heart.
Amen.
Thank y'all.
Amen. I'm gonna defer and see if, our superintendent have any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's already been stated by the Board of Education, the appreciation that goes into the work of the staff, the students, the family, the resilience that I've observed in my 33 days as superintendent has been impressive. And so, again, know that our top priority is to create exceptional learning experiences for our students. We'll do that through service. We'll do that to the best of our ability every day. And so thank you for what you do, thank you for what you've done, and thank you for what you will do.
Okay, thank you. In the words of a famous line from a family movie, are we there yet? We almost there. just hold tight. We're almost there. So I know it's been long and hard, and trust me, I pray for each and every one of you every day, and we're almost there. One thing I do want to drop a seed for Dr. Taylor and maybe Mrs. Simmons to. I was contacted by a healthcare professional, and I had been talking with Dr. Taylor to get some numbers. We have about 30% of our staff who have not been vaccinated. That should be somewhere, I guess, around 420 to 450 people. But we have a healthcare professional, the owner of Reliant Health and Home Physician Services, Ms. Stephanie Collier. She has contracted with, I think it's Moderna, to get the vaccines, and she is ready to assist any staff that missed out on getting vaccinated, getting their shots, and I will give you her contact information for you all to utilize and maybe contact her. But she realized that there are some employees that did not get vaccinated, and they may want to now, because I know I originally had some reservations, but you know, I eventually had a change of heart, and maybe some of them may fall in that category. So I'll get you that information for her to be able to offer that service to us.
And Mr. Chair, I think it's important to note of that 30%, several of those may have actually experienced COVID and still have the antibodies, and some doctors are recommending waiting a certain amount of time before you actually get that.
Right. But as stated, we do have someone that is, I guess, you know, concerned for our staff and want to make their services available. So just putting that out there. If there's nothing else, we do have one item for executive session. We have two items. I know one is for us to, you know, seek legal counseling on a pending or pertaining to potential litigation, and
Employment personnel?
employment personnel is the other. With that being said, could we get a motion to adjourn?
No,
So
go into executive session.
Motion, I mean, to go into executive session.
So moved.
Motion and a second by Mr. Brown. All in favor? All right, thank you all, and for those that I did not speak to, hello and well wishes to you and your family.